Hello, and welcome to this training session brought to you by the Society of American Archivists, Archivists of Religious Collections Section. My name is Michelle Tolley, and we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional lands of many Indigenous nations. We know that Indigenous peoples have suffered from historical and ongoing injustices and understand as an archival organization that we must work toward sharing historical truths and renew respectful relationships with Indigenous communities. We respect the longstanding relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land as the original caretakers. We are grateful for their stewardship and protection of the water and earth. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Today's topic is archival accessioning for beginners. Before I introduce our presenter, let's review the disclaimers. The content in these presentations is for information only and is not legal advice. Our views do not represent the organizations where we work. We do not make any endorsements or guarantees. We are not liable for any loss or damage caused by your use of the content we provide, and it is your responsibility to critically evaluate the content provided in the presentation or any accompanying materials. Also, please remember the points shown on this slide. You will not be able to use your microphone or video during this session. You can click on the closed captioning button at the bottom of your screen, and under Live Transcript, click Enable Auto Transcription to get closed captioning. There will be a question period after the presentation concludes. You should use the Q&A feature to ask your questions. We will not answer questions in the chat or unmute attendees due to time constraints. Please be respectful in your interactions. We expect you to follow the SAA Code of Conduct, which you can see at that link. The session will be recorded, and please fill out the short survey after the session ends. We encourage you to join the Society of American Archivists if you are not a member already. And we would like to thank the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph in Canada for hosting this webinar. And now I would like to introduce our presenter, Nicole Manchese. Nicole received a BA in geography from the University of Memphis, where she concentrated her studies in cartography and history. She completed her MLIS at Long Island University with the Advanced Certificate in Archives and Records Management. She is currently the Digitization and Archives Coordinator for the Long Island Library Resources Council, where she offers educational workshops, provides advice for the processing, housing, and display of special collections, oversees participation in the New York Heritage Digital Collections website for cultural institutions on Long Island, and executes the annual Long Island Archives Conference. Previously, she managed the collection of the Oyster Bay Historical Society, Raynham Hall Museum, the Townsend Society of America, Sewanaka Yacht Club, and the North Shore Historical Museum as a trustee. Go ahead, Nicole.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. And let me just say it's been it's an honor to speak with you all today, and I really appreciate the opportunity. Let me go ahead and get my slides going here, and we'll just jump right in. So this is archival accessioning for beginners. And as Michelle said, my name is Nicole Manchese. I'm the Digitization and Archives Coordinator for the Long Island Library Resources Council. And I started this program because I found so many locations, smaller historical societies, house museums, even local history rooms and libraries were just kind of not really quite understanding or able to grasp some of the larger theories about archival work. So I decided ambitiously to create a series of programs and break it all down into these smaller sessions so that archives management wouldn't seem so intimidating. So later on this summer, we're going to be talking about acquisitions and appraisal and maybe arrangement and possibly even later description as I continue with this series. Today, we're going to be jumping a little bit ahead into accessioning. And accessioning is the act of transferring objects or whatever your collections are to the permanent collection of a repository by gaining legal, physical, and intellectual control. And I'm going to talk about each of those things in good detail. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Excuse me. There we go. Okay, so when we talk about legal, we're talking about the legal transfer of title. And that means that what we need when a item comes in for collection, and sometimes I like to use a little prop. So I'm going to maybe even use my coffee mug here and just treat it like a beautiful piece of pottery. And it's certainly, you know, a commercial product, but we're going to pretend that it's maybe an original piece. Okay. So when something comes into your archival setting, what we need to do is get that legal control. And that would require a document that is signed by the donor and transfers clear title to the repository or to your history room or what have you. So it's typically a statement where the donor who owns the object has the authority to pass clear title. Sometimes it's a gift without restrictions or may have specific restrictions. And it's also a statement that the donor relinquishes all rights that he or she may have had. So how has this been achieved both in the past and how we want it to continue into the future? So in the past, and I've found this across Long Island, and I'm sure it's the same everywhere, where an organization might have been started in the 60s. Several of them started in the 70s with the bicentennial of our nation. But in the 60s and 70s, I've noticed that a lot of objects that first arrived into a historical society or a repository were given with either a handshake deal or some kind of oral agreement. And I write here, you know, once upon a time, that might have been good enough to seal the deal. But it's problematic, right? We don't have enough information about the item. It doesn't help anybody currently or any future caretakers and stewards, leaving everybody in the dark as to what happened, what we know about the provenance of the item, where it came from, you know, why it's important to this collection. So it just leaves a lot to be desired, and it's certainly not ideal in this day and age and should be avoided at all costs. We're going to talk a little bit later in a slide about how to maybe kind of retrofit this into your collection with a deed of gift that you might be able to find or have somebody who is a descendant of the owner. But we'll get to that in that slide a little bit later. So in the past, handshake deal, sometimes you might find a letter where it's just a handwritten note, something like that just reads, you know, I'm happy to hand off this quilt or this, you know, piece of pottery, what have you. That's at least something that would express an intent to donate, and that does sort of hold water when you're trying to justify or when you're trying to prove that you do have, you know, legal title of the object, but it's still not ideal. So some of the other ways that things come into collections, sometimes they're purchased, but at least with the purchase, you have a receipt showing that you've paid for it. Occasionally things are bequested. So if it's in someone's will, you can have that paperwork that shows that it was intended for your organization by the donor. And then sometimes things come in as a transfer. So let's just say a neighboring museum or historical society gets a donation, or maybe they find something that's in their collection when they're kind of going through their annual or biannual inventory, and they realize, you know, this doesn't really have anything to do with our mission, but hey, that organization down the street, this would be perfect for them. So sometimes when we get those kinds of situation and it's just an organization to organization transfer, it's a little bit easier. You get all of their paperwork that they have from their deed of gift from their donor, and then it sort of transfers into a new deed of gift for yourself and your organization. If you have questions about that, just throw them in the chat and we can get to it later. But typically these are the ways that we get items into the collection and have in the past. But ideally, we want everything to come in going forward using a deed of gift. So this deed of gift is a legal agreement transferring title to an archival resource without monetary recompense to the donor, and it's takes kind of the form of this contract. Most deeds of gift have the same format. I've made up this Greater Academy Historical Society. We'll see this a little bit later on, but this is not really an actual place, so don't try and check that website out because it doesn't exist. But in this deed of gift, we have a very standardized format. We have a space for the accession number, the date that the deed of gift is signed, or at least when the deed of gift is filled out. We have a name of a donor, the address, phone number, email, and then very brief, usually very brief description of the donated items. And then here are the big two paragraphs. Donor understands and agrees that the Historical Society has the discretion to basically use the archive, or I'm sorry, use the donation for maybe display or exhibition, for promotional purposes, things of that nature. And then the second paragraph there allows the donor to select whether they are the owner of the materials and have unrestricted gift to the Historical Society. Then there's a couple other options, and whether or not they are the copyright holder. So sometimes it's a very clear-cut thing. It's my grandmother made this pottery, and I am now donating it to the Historical Society. So I am the owner. I have clear right to this object, and I'm giving it now to the Historical Society. Doesn't mean you can't take things that are not, obviously we take things in all the time. We take in books and things of that nature that aren't, the creator isn't giving it to you, the author isn't giving you their book, but it still at least gives you the option to, digitize that for preservation purposes. Essentially, this is just the document that allows you to say without hesitation that this is the person who had this object, and now I'm willfully and acknowledging that I'm giving this to the Historical Society. So you can go online and find a number of examples. Most larger organizations are very, very transparent when it comes to their documents, well, not only just a deed of gift, but also their collections management policy, things like that. So we'll get into that in a second. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So that was the legal control of the object. Then we have to deal with the physical control of the object. And it's actually a lot simpler than it sounds. This is really just how the object is transported in to your location. Most of the time, the object is brought in by the donor. Very rarely, but occasionally you may have to go to a donor's home and pick up an object for them. Maybe they're just can't physically manage the object. And I'm talking more about things like furnishings and larger, heavier objects. But in most cases, the things like photographs or small objects are brought in by the donor. If it is, though, needed to either be transported by staff or maybe by a third-party vendor, you think about the condition of the object. Is it fragile? If you are picking it up, you want to make sure that you are bringing enough, I wouldn't say equipment, but bringing a box, tissue paper, certainly gloves, and just whatever you think you might need to transport that object safely. Even if it's, photographs, just maybe you don't want them all shuffling around in whatever box that they have. You want to maybe tuck it in with a little more tissue paper or something like that. So it all depends on also whether or not you know exactly what it is you're getting. I know that when I've gone to places and picked up items, sometimes a few more things get tacked into that donation. So and you have to just kind of be prepared for some curveballs. But as you're transferring, even if it's just in your car, around here, getting from one side of Long Island to another side of Long Island can take as many as 4 to 5 hours. Usually it's just an hour and a half or 2 hours in either direction. But you have to think about, what you have in your cargo. So I used an example before about you may have a doll with one of those beautiful bisque heads, and it might be a beautiful day outside and, you want to put the top down. Well, let's think twice about that, because the sun, the heat, the elements, all of that can contribute to some deterioration, especially if those objects have been, I don't know, maybe they've been in a location in somebody's home for a number of years, possibly the attic, hopefully not the basement, but it's been those objects, especially photographs and paper-based archives, they get used to, they're organic materials. So they get used to a certain temperature and a certain relative humidity. So taking that object away or out of a house or out of maybe even one repository to another, you have to factor in a little bit about how big the swings are in temperature and relative humidity. So just something to think about. We're not going to get into too many more details about that, but it is just something to consider when you're when moving objects from one physical or geographic location to another. Place the objects in a safe space and acid-free housing as quickly as you can. Sometimes you can't get to it right away. We'll talk about that in a second. But if the object is not brought in by the donor, especially if it's brought in by a third party, maybe you're getting a very large piece of fine art, that might have to be moved by a third party reputable art handler. So just get all that documentation, make sure that you're getting a copy of everything, insurance, any kind of provenance, the changes in ownership over time, that sort of thing. So just be mindful if you're using a third-party vendor, then you need a copy of all of that to sort of go into the file that will be created for this donation. And here I have my little wise old owl with just kind of some personal tidbits. This is an excellent time when you're looking at the object, whether it's being brought in or you're having to go get it, whether it's a box of photographs and documents or a piece of pottery or a piece of fine art. It's an excellent time to start thinking about how you're going to house this in your location, what supplies you're going to need, and start thinking about, getting that order in. So if you're going to need a specially sized box, or if it's going to have some sort of like exterior wrap, something to, protect it from, just the heat, the light, things like that. So once you have something in your repository, you'll want to try and get it into that acid-free housing as soon as you can. So whether it's like we have up here, one of these metal-edged document boxes, or even just an acid-free banker's box that I like to use just as a temporary setup. Leaving things in those cardboard boxes that are often the box, from wherever, shipping box, what have you, that people tend to bring things into your repository. Those are really, really damaging for archives. So it's great to just have at least one or two sort of loose acid-free boxes that you can transfer things into as quickly as possible. Leaving it in your archive in that box, a week, 2 weeks, it's probably not the end of the world, but we want to try and do as best we can by these archives. So having it in a putting it in that acid restore as quickly as possible. So that's the second part. That's the physical control. So not that hard to really wrap your head around. And then the intellectual control. So this is where we give our item. This is kind of that final moment where it's we're really wedded to the object. So we give the item, or the donation, I should say, an accession number. And then we begin to enter this information into this form. So this is from the New York State Archives. It's just a random example. You can find many examples of accession paperwork just thanks to the World Wide Web. So you may decide to find an organization that's of similar size or of similar scope as far as what you're collecting, but essentially these forms are pretty much all the same. So you see that we have the accession number, a place for the accession number to go, the date the items were received, a space where the items were accessioned. So sometimes that's not always the same day. Typically it is the same day, but sometimes it's not. Maybe someone's out of town or something comes in, especially if something came in and it received a temporary custody receipt. We'll get to that. Or it's not the person who makes the decisions about whether something is actually going to be a part of the collection isn't around. So the day that things come in isn't always the day it's a session. So there's space for both dates. And then the donor contact information, which is critical, having as much information about how you can reach that donor. There's no space, I believe, on this form. This was probably written before the advent of the internet, but I certainly encourage not only like a street address, but also actually, I apologize. They're just taking a quick look. Oh, so when, yeah, you can add that to it, but this is really going to accompany the deed of gift. So you'll have that information with the deed of gift. But having a little donor contact information, the scope of the objects in that donation. So, is it objects? Is it a stack of letters, and approximately what date range are the letters? So, just as much information as you can kind of at a glance get is really what we want for this accessioning form. And this is really the beginnings. This is the first accession form is the skeleton for your finding aid when it comes to this donation. So it's really kind of the very beginnings. And from this point on, you're just going to build and build with the description of the items in this donation. Okay, any restrictions or provenance notes? So there's a lot of options here. You can tweak it. Of course, this is just an older accession form from the New York State Archives. But like I said, don't reinvent the wheel. Go and find other accession forms from different kinds of locations and just see how they vary. And you can kind of build and tweak your own to suit your repository's needs. Wise Old Owl here reminds us that it's never written anywhere. I haven't seen it anywhere, but from my practical experience, I like to take a picture of the collection and maybe even spread some things out and take several photographs, just in case in the unlikely event things get moved around, or maybe the paperwork somehow gets separated from the items. I like to keep at least a copy of the accession form in the box in which the donation is being held. Just to make my life a little bit easier. And I like having a couple of photographs of what's being donated so that I can just visually make that connection as well. So this is actually, it's straight out of the Past Perfect Museum Software Handbook. So this is a museum a collections managing software. And you can see here the accessioning information can be keyed in and then printed off. So here in the previous slide, in the previous slide, I've got, just the paper form. This is a way of doing it, electronically, but I highly recommend that you print off this. This allows you to print off into a nice little form, but having that paper copy in with all the deed of gift and other photographs that you may have taken and any other subsequent documents that might need to go with the donation, all keeping together in a folder and somehow in whatever your filing system is. But here we have just an example of what we were talking about, but just not in the paper form, in electronic form. So we have our accession number, we have the name of the donor, the donor's address, phone number, all those things I was talking about. This is something interesting too, this credit line. That's nice. And that's also something that you would want to talk to the donor about if they do have, say, an object and you can envision that object being a part of an exhibition. I like to ask people, if this object was made by someone's grandmother, I would say, well, how about if we do exhibit this, we can add it, as a little note at the bottom of the label, the exhibition label, something like, donated in memory of so-and-so or things like that. It's a nice touch. Not everybody wants it. I just like to, if I'm having that conversation already with the donor, I try and bring it up. And here we have some other information as well that's that you can either include in your paper copy or, here it is where it's received by. So sometimes it's a different employee, or maybe it's the person at the front desk in a library. People drop off stuff all the time at the circulation desk, and it's supposed to go to the local history room. So this is kind of interesting stuff where you can have who it was received by, when it was received, who did the accessioning, when it was accessioned. And then down here, we get into the more objects individually. And we may jump back to the slide, but again, this is just an example of how the same information is just added electronically. So here's my workflow. Okay, so here we're going to start, and I'm going to use my cursor as my pointer. So we start down here where the donor and the repository set a meeting. In a perfect world, we have a donor that sets an appointment and then brings in the items to be discussed. I recommend to every location, whether it's a museum, historical site, local history room, that there's some kind of information either on the website or even on your social media pages where you just insist that donations come in with an appointment. I like to use language like, we want to know more about your donation. It's important to us. Your story, your history, whatever you're donating, it's important enough to sit down for 20 minutes, a half an hour, and just talk to me about what it is, where it came from, why it's significant, and why it belongs in my historical society. And these aren't untrue statements, but people sometimes don't think that their stuff is all that valuable, or they just don't think we would be interested in their story. And that's certainly not true. So here's where I'm going to introduce this temporary custody receipt, and we talk about it in other sessions, and you may hear me talk about it if you come to see more of these. But the donor and the repository set a meeting in a perfect world. The donor comes in, and the objects are discussed, and that's the appraisal point of the workflow. And then whether or not the person who makes those decisions is actually getting to be the person talking to the donor, they may decide to just jump into a temporary custody receipt, which is essentially just as it says, a temporary custody receipt, a receipt whereby the historical society, I'm just going to say historical society, but basically mean any repository, where the Historical Society would take in an object with the caveat that within 30 to 90 days, we will decide whether or not we will actually accession it into the collection. So sometimes an object may or may not fit with the organization's mission. So this gives you that chance to kind of back out. So in some cases, especially like in a library where the person who's working the reference desk or the circulation desk gets, I don't know, a photograph, or maybe it's some kind of a cool object related to the library, they'll have that person sign a temporary custody receipt, which allows at least the donor to give them their information and sign off that they are going to temporarily release it, and then a decision will be made in a timely manner, and then either that person will have to come back and get that donation, or maybe the organization will keep it. So in the case of a temporary custody receipt, that gets signed, and then the objects are determined either by a collections committee, or maybe you're the person who makes that decision, but sometimes it's helpful to have a couple of extra people to kind of confer on whether or not something's actually right for the archive. But sometimes you just get an object and you're super excited about it, and you know exactly that you want it in your collection. So we have the accessioning number immediately created and a deed of gift signed right then and there. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens most of the time. So we get our deed of gift signed and created. We send, a couple of weeks later, you send like a thank you and whatnot, and then we create the actual accession record. So that is just the simplest workflow. Okay, so even though technically I'm not doing processing right here and now, I have created sort of a fictional scenario that I think will put all of this into perspective. Okay. Just going to check my time. Okay, I think we're doing okay. All right, so here we have, and again, this is not an actual real historical society, but I did give it a tagline, where the past is present. So here we are at the Greater Academy Historical Society, and here is our background. Okay, so we have Mr. Curtis Stevens is the son of Mr. John Stevens, who is the little boy in the picture here on the left. Curtis calls to meet to discuss his donation of his father's baseball glove and an old family photograph. Handwritten on the back of the photograph are the names of the individuals and the date, which is October 3rd, 1926. The individuals are, left to right, John, Percy, Phyllis, and Martha Stevens. What else do we know about John Stevens? Well, in our interview with Mr. Curtis Stevens, we learned the following: that John Stevens settled in Academy, New York after his career as a baseball player for the Brooklyn Robins, when that ended, and he had played from 1931 to 1937, okay? This is, of course, fictional. He became a prominent attorney, philanthropist, and community leader in the emerging city of Academy, and resided there until his death in 1974. The Greater Academy Historical Society is delighted to meet with Curtis and inspect the items he wishes to donate. So here we have a baseball glove and the photograph that Curtis Stevens wants to donate. So what happens next? Mr. Curtis Stevens has met with the Greater Academy Historical Society archivist, and after discussion about the baseball glove and photograph, it is decided on the spot that these items are a good fit with the collections policy and mission of the society. That is underlined for a reason. In these moments, a temporary custody receipt is redundant. So I know that I want this in my historical society. I don't need to go around anybody else. I'm the one who gets to make the decisions. So I'm going to go ahead and do a deed of gift. Again, if you're not the one making the decisions and you have to answer to a collections committee, a deed of gift, a temporary custody receipt would be more appropriate. Okay. Again, these are all part of the policies that you come up with each organization, depending on how much staff you have. So we had a good meeting with Mr. Stevens. As the deed of gift form is being filled out, the archivist is interviewing the donor and taking careful notes about the object's provenance, so a fuller description can be created in the accession form and individual object records. A deed of gift is filled out, signed by both parties. Mr. Stevens will leave with a copy of the signed document, and in a few days, the Greater Academy Historical Society will send a thank you letter. Personally, I like to add the accession number and object identifiers, if possible, to the deed of gift. So in the deed of gift, if you've already know what your next accession number is, you can tack it on then, or you can wait until you fill out your accession form. Okay, and so there we have our handshake deal, but with the paperwork, right? So, and so here is again, the mock-up deed of gift. So we've got the accession number, we have the date, we have the name of the donor, his address, his email, his phone number, and then brief description. So I have here, number one, a baseball glove belonging to the donor's father, Mr. John Stevens. And I've even gone ahead and figured out that if this is my accession number, that this will be the object identifier. And the same thing with number two, family photograph of John, Percy, Phyllis, Martha Stevens. And again, the accession number with the addition of the object identifier. And here I have this little note saying more on the second page. Well, I don't really have a second page, but this is where like you would have maybe again, a notebook, piece of paper. While you're having that conversation with Mr. Stevens, you're getting all kinds of information. You're getting the information of when his father played in the not professional league, but I'm sorry, I'm losing my thought process on the baseball terms, but anyway, is when he played baseball, a little bit maybe about the kinds of philanthropic organizations that he was involved with, just kind of filling out a little bit more about Mr. John Stevens and what his legacy is. Then down here at the second paragraph, okay, Curtis Stevens says, I donate the above described materials as an unrestricted gift and transfer to the Historical Society the copyright and literary property rights as far as we hold them. So he was the owner because he inherited his father's photograph and baseball glove. So it was his right to transfer it over. And then here we have Curtis Stevens' signature and the date. And then the person who works at Susan Fields, fictional archivist over at the Greater Academy Historical Society. Okay, and so she signed it, he signed it. All of this is will be, typed in electronically at a later time when you're adding it to your database. But right now, this is the legal control of the item. Then, either at the moments after the fact or maybe a day or two after the fact, you don't want to wait too long, you're going to fill out the accession form. And that's now establishing intellectual control. So the archivist will sit down to a clean surface with plenty of room to look carefully over the objects while filling out the accession form. And this, like I said, is the first finding aid to the collection. It's like I said, the skeleton. The archivist then completes their inspection and describes the object. So if there's damage, if there's maybe some handwriting, I believe on this baseball glove, there was someone's name written in pen, as has been done over the years. I could tell that some of the straps, the leather straps, were loose or missing altogether. I could see that there was some corrosion on the metal grommets. So all of that is going to be added into my notes. So we fill out this form to our best ability. And again, it could just be the one page, or you can have multiple pages depending on how much stuff you get. This was, I did this specifically for this presentation, so I just kept it small, 2 objects, but it's often the case is not just two objects. Sometimes you get a box and it's got photographs and it's got letters and it's got who knows what in it. And you can just kind of maybe just do kind of a very rough description of what everything is without getting into the details. You may have many photographs that come into your organization that are donated to you that are unidentified. And that's, that's actually a choice you can decide on for yourselves, whether or not you'll accept things that are unidentified. But all of this is going to end up in a spreadsheet or a database like we just saw with Past Perfect, and then eventually, hopefully, get down to at least the folder level, or in this case, it'll be the item level since we only have 2 items. Wise old owl, why paper? We live in an electronic world. Who wants to use paper anymore? I've just found it easier to walk around with a legal pad and sit down in front of the object and write. It's not always easy to have the object or objects brought to your desk or your PC or your laptop. Sometimes it just physically isn't possible. I also like to be able to write things out and just kind of scratch them off and then think about how I'm going to arrange it. So I'm using my legal pad and I'm looking at everything during this accessioning process and kind of getting my first footings on how I'm going to arrange things. So that's, again, the next session or the next step. But this is kind of, it all sort of is, it's all very closely related. Okay. So the appraisal, the accessioning, the arrangement. So that's just my opinion. I find that it's easier sometimes just to write it all out. Plus, either way, I'm going to print out a piece of paper and put it in the archives. And here's the accession form filled out. So we've got, the accession number and just a little bit more similar information. And again, this is pretty much taken directly from that New York State Archives form. And then we're going to get our physical controls. So I've found myself an acceptable box in my storage unit. I've got some tissue paper. I've taken the photograph. I've put it in a PAT, a PAT passed polyester sleeve. That will also go into a folder to additionally protect it from light and just pretty much any banging around. And then I'm going to go ahead and keep the photograph in with the baseball glove, just so that I can just have one number on the box and that it's associated with this one donation. It's okay to house objects, like I said, in less than ideal folders or boxes, but while you're waiting for the right materials to arrive, sometimes something comes in, maybe like an old 8mm or Super 8 film comes in, or even like some kind of, 12mm or 35mm film comes in, and you need to have a special archives box for that. So that can take a week or so. So it's okay if you have to have like some kind of temporary storage. Ideally, though, you have a few things set aside that are acid-free that you can transfer from a highly acidic box into something that's, like I said, acid-free. Keep everything together. I like to actually put the accession form in the folder or in the box, in addition to everything else. And I'm maybe a little obsessive about that, but when you work in a historical society and you find no paperwork, then it's really difficult. And you don't want to pass that heartbreak and difficulty and headache onto the next person. So I would rather be a little excessive and have maybe one more piece of paperwork in with that folder with the photograph and keep it all together, in addition to the folder that you see here on my lower right, where I have the original deed of gift, the original accession form. There's my printout of the photograph that I took of my items when they first came in. So everything's together. But this is the physical control part is kind kind of the fun part where you get to actually look at the object, think about how well it needs to be supported. You know, maybe it's an old hat. It needs to have some kind of like tissue on the inside of the crown of the hat so that that stays stabilized. So this is that moment where you're going to be thinking about long-term storage, acid-free boxes, and everything that's necessary to keep your archival donation safe. Now, I have a few minutes to talk about how you can retroactively achieve legal transfer. Not an easy task. I've been able to successfully do some items that way when I was working at the Oyster Bay Historical Society. First thing you can try to do is look through any paperwork. Those old filing cabinets that are dusty, go through all of those old files. You never know where a letter or just some random deed of gift is going to pop up. Or, you know, usually, especially if it's something before we really started kind of making it, you know, a professional requirement to use deeds of gift, and people were just doing things by handshake, and they were just writing a little letter. Those little scraps of paper, they can be anywhere. So look through all and any of your paperwork. Also look through minutes of trustee meetings. Minutes from the 50s and 60s and 70s were really, really detailed. So sometimes you get lucky and there's a little tidbit in there about something that was donated. Does your object have a identifier somewhere written on it, or a tag that has an identifier? Maybe that tag can tell you something. Then you can hopefully, if you get some idea of where the object came from, you can look up the closest relative. In communities around Long Island, people are multi-generational in these tiny hamlets and towns. So it's usually pretty easy to find somebody who's related to the donor, even if the donor has been long gone for many, many decades. So we find whoever's the closest relative. I've written like a mea culpa letter that just says, I'm sorry, but I don't think we ever got proper transfer. Would you mind signing this deed of gift? So I write a letter that basically says, you know, we're trying to do better. This is in the collection. We have some idea that it was given to us by your grandfather, father, uncle, what have you, mother, what have you. But nobody ever signed a formal deed of gift. So I have the letter that just says, sincerely, we really hope that we can just make this a legal transaction. I send them 2 deeds of gift with the information already written out. So all they have to do is sign it. But I send them 2 copies, one for them to sign and send back to me, and one for them to keep for their records. And my little trick is to send anytime you're sending anything to a donor and you got to do it by mail, do yourself a huge favor and use a self-addressed stamped envelope and fold that in with the envelope with the deed of gift or whatever paperwork you need, and send it, because it just makes it so much easier for people to just sign it, pop it in that envelope, drop it in their mailbox on their walk to the coffee shop, or just in their own mailbox for their postal carrier to pick up. So it's not impossible. It's just very, very difficult. So this also leads me to something, another wise owl moment here, where if you are not already doing this, and I am leaning here towards New York State codes and rules and regulations, but this is just good practice anyway for wherever in the world you are, is every month, if you have a board meeting month, month to month, or every other month, whenever it happens, create a report, an accessions report, maybe even including who the donor is and what the accessions were that you created since the last board meeting. It should be a part of your board meeting minutes. In New York State, it's required that you're supposed to send every year an entire list of your accessions. So it's a good practice to get into if you're not already doing that. This is a list of some resources. I've done some other videos. You'll see at the top, I did another series. This one particular one was about temporary custody receipts and deeds of gift. And then I've found a few collections management policies that this one from Beloit Historical Society is really fantastic. It's actually small-ish, but it's so clear, and it's just one of the most well done collections management policies I've ever encountered. So I use it all the time in my resources for other folks. And then there's some other further reading that you can take a look at your leisure. And this will do it for me at this point. I'm ready to answer any questions. We are, I think, right on time for that.
Thank you so much, Nicole. That was a fantastic presentation, and we do have quite a few questions. I will try to get to as many of them as possible. So there are actually two here that are quite similar, so hopefully if you answer one, it will answer the other. How do you handle if the donor wants an item back after the legal, physical, intellectual transfer has already happened? Or has that
Well,
ever happened?
yeah, well, if it's happening to you now, I hate that for you. Yeah, so I've not had this personal experience, but I did just recently was in a conversation with someone who said that there was a medal that her woman's father had won. I believe it was in Vietnam. And when he passed, she gave it to the Historical Society. And then his sister tried to get it back from the Historical Society, but they were like, no, you actually don't have the right to do that. So, and the daughter held firm that this is where it belonged. And so the sister really had nowhere to go. She didn't have any real legal footing. So, yeah, unfortunately, that may happen. But if a deed of gift is actually signed, then you have the legal right to that object. If it's never been signed and somebody says, I think, or you can't find it, I would check with your state and how you can get what we call found in collection items, which is basically an item that has no number, no nothing. It's historic. It has something to do with your community. It belongs at the Historical Society, truly, but you have no idea where it came from. Every state is a little bit different. New York has a way of a way to go online and actually kind of have it under some kind of like lost property sort of thing. And you fill out a form and it sits there for a few months. You're supposed to also do due diligence by getting that object in your local paper and just saying, the Historical Society seeks to find the donor of blah, 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 blah. And if nobody comes after something like 180 days or something like that, then it's yours. So that's how we deal with found in collection items. So if it is a situation where you don't have a deed of gift and you're afraid that somebody might come and get it, then you can try and do go by the state and work in that capacity, or you can maybe seek out to have a deed of gift signed by someone who is a relative. But yeah, that deed of gift is rock solid.
Great. Okay. This one I think is in relation to your example that you were giving with the Great Academy. Does Great Academy also want to know if other items / records / papers of the father were previously donated to the museum and archives? So if there's something already existing.
Well, that was all fictional. That was me making, but if it was, yeah. So if the father had actually come before and had donated items, the accession number would still be the year he came in. So let's say he came in 1964 when the place was founded and decided to donate a whole bunch of maybe like his baseball card collection or whatever the heck. Then it would have that year that was accessioned and in most cases we try and do accession numbers where it's in most cases the year it's donated and then a donor number. So everybody numbers things a little. I shouldn't say. I'm sorry. I don't want to misspeak. Numbering is a little tricky for some places, but typically the standard is year it comes in, who donated it, or some sort of notation numbers of who donated it and then how many objects were donated. So if he had come in before, it would be a totally different accession number from this. It would be, considered a completely separate collection, and they would probably be stored still separately. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, ask again. Sorry. I know we have to wrap up soon. What else do you have? I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're almost at time. Would you be able to share those links from the last slide in the chat right now? Do you have time to do that?
Yeah, I
Or is
can
that
try.
possible?
I think I can get those in there real quick. Hang on.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay. One of the other questions here, have you found it important to note objects offsite location in the accession record? Like, for example, if the item was found in an attic.
I mean, you could add that to yeah, you can add whatever information you can get as to maybe what I have condition notes. If I, like I was saying about that baseball glove and how, straps were missing and stuff was corroded. So yeah, you could definitely put something like that in that and in your notes. Doesn't hurt.
Yeah, yeah. More information, the better. This one is good. How do you recommend dealing with sudden drop-offs? I frequently have people come by to drop off a few items they found, mail things in with brief summary notes, or they leave things in my mailbox without any note at all.
Yeah, I really hate that. The only thing we can try to do is, I mean, I say like the best offense is a good defense. So I try to, again, put on my socials. I encourage it on the website. I even tell people to make a little trifold, like a little pamphlet that says something like in bright and colorful. It says, "Do you want to donate here?" And then here's why, we need to make an appointment. And some people will still drop things off. All you can do is hope and encourage folks to drop things off and at least leave a note. I mean, maybe even have a slip inside that trifold where it's like, or something else, or like, if you insist on leaving this, please at least just leave your phone number. Maybe you can find a clue in the box as to who it belonged to, but yeah. Check out the Found in Collection program that you can probably find. If you find that link in the chat is our Vimeo channel for the Long Island Library Resources Council. So you can find other programs that I've done, and Found in Collection is one of them. Let me see. I'm going to give you guys, let's see. Okay, next, or is there another? Hello?
Yep. We can probably do one more question, and then we probably need to wrap up. So if you take your notes on a legal pad and transcribe your notes on official documents, should you keep your handwritten notes as part of the whole process, or is it fine to dispose of those once you're finished?
I mean, I just keep it all. What's another piece of paper? I mean, yeah, I just kind of, like I said, I would have a folder with the accession number, and in it would be everything. And I'd have it, scanned as PDFs, if I added it electronically, but yeah, I keep all my notes. Might as well. Can't hurt.
Yep. Great. Okay, I think we need to wrap up now. We're very close to 4 p.m. and we want to finish right on time. Nicole will be back July 11th for archival arrangement for beginners, and then also on August 22nd for archival appraisal for beginners. So please feel free to come to those sessions as well. And our next SAA session is actually an archival chat, which will be on June 20th. And it is the Shambhala Buddhist Archives with Jan Reardon. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to attend. And thank you all for coming today. And thank you, Nicole.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, everyone.